Hello everyone, my name is Havian and today I'll be talking to you about Sword Art Online Alicization Lycoris. Recently there was another developer livestream that showed some gameplay that seemed to focus on a very early portion of the game. This little gameplay preview included some North Centauria and Cordia Plains exploration, collecting quests from people in towns, and some great sword gameplay. But as always, there's plenty of other information that we can get from the gameplay, even if it wasn't the main focus of the stream. One of those things were the status effects in the game. Status effects are not something that I'd usually pay too much attention to, but I feel like in this game there's something that may be worth being aware of beforehand. In a previous video I managed to freeze Alice in mid-air during a combo, and I have no idea if that's something that will be possible in the full game, but I'm sure there will be interesting ways people will be able to use the status effects to their advantage, if you can still do things like that. But equally, I feel like enemies could put you in some rough situations if you're not aware of the kinds of statuses they can inflict. Most of the status effects are going to be familiar to people that have played the previous Sword Art Online games or RPGs. Expect to see effects that can cause your health and SP to bleed out, others that lower your maximum health or SP, one that can decrease your movement speed, another that can lower your stats, or one that's able to paralyze you so your actions get cancelled randomly. But there are some others that are worth knowing about so you're not surprised and caught off guard when they actually happen to your party. There's a few status effects that can lock your characters in place or affect the way that you control them. Let's take the bind status effect for example. If you're bound, you can't move from your current location until the effect wears off. From what they showed us in a few dev streams, there seems to be enemies that can use attacks that follow you for a short period of time. So if you're locked in place because you're frozen or bound, things could get nasty if they can't be blocked. But I feel like that's something you can use to your advantage if there's a way for players to inflict bind on enemies, just like they can with freeze. I mentioned in a previous video that bows and whips would probably have a big advantage against certain enemies if you combine them because of their longer range compared to other weapons. So effects like bind and freeze are something worth looking out for when enemies inflict them. But they're also something that can help you a lot if you can find a way to work them into your combos. But those are the status effects that I think we'll kind of expect from a game like this. But how about we go into the status effects that I think will give us the most problems? Confusion, panic, stun, and launch. Confusion is a status effect that reverses your movement inputs, and it seems like it would be more of an annoyance rather than something that would be a huge problem most of the time, since during combat you can just dash towards a target when you push the attack button. But I feel like this is going to be a status effect that can put us in a lot of danger if we actually need to reposition ourselves to avoid enemy attacks. Since if you need to make the decision to dodge out of the way of an unblockable attack, your reaction is probably going to be to move the movement stick away from the enemy. But because your input movements are going to be reversed, you'd probably need to move your analog stick towards the enemy so you can actually move away, which may actually end up confusing people, which is kind of the point of the status effect. If your characters are inflicted with fear, they'll start to panic and they won't be able to tell the difference between enemies and allies. I assume that this status effect will probably make you use basic attacks on your nearest targets, whether they're enemies or allies, for a few seconds. But depending on how this status effect actually works, it could be the one that's the worst for your party to get. If your sword skills can hit both enemies and allies while you're panicked, that's when it will be dangerous. Since certain sword skills have a really long range and you may not be able to see them coming if you're unaware of this status effect. But you can probably take steps to avoid taking too much damage if this actually is the case. And you may be able to just command your party members to spread out, or you can just move your controlled character away from the rest of the party until the status effects ends if you still have control over them. Stun is also a status effect that you can inflict on enemies, but if you're not careful, it's something that they can also do to you. If you fill the hazard gauge up while fighting an enemy, this will cause it to become stunned. You can fill the hazard gauge up by doing things like attacking or parrying the enemy. But you can also be stunned if an enemy breaks through your guard, or if certain enemies do things like roar or scream, that can put your characters in a stun state, and you can actually take damage from it as well. Launch is less of a status effect and it's more of a state that your character can enter after certain enemy attacks hit them. but when you do get launched, you're completely vulnerable until you hit the ground again. So there is a good chance that you'll be hit by any follow-up attacks that the enemy decides he wants to use. But launching is also something that you can do, and it's something that you'll definitely want to make use of to extend your combos and control fights. During the stream, they did show some other things that will give us a better idea of how the game will flow. There'll be main storyline quests that you'll need to complete in order to progress through the game, but you'll also be able to pick up side quests from citizens in the city and from the towns that you'll find while exploring the world. And based on what we can see from the minimap, there seems to be many points of interest that you can actually go and see. In the city, it will be things like blacksmiths and shops, and out in the open world, it will be what seems to be things like fishing, finding landmarks that give you quests, and finding bosses to take down. It looks like they added a combat log that can be toggled on and off for the people that need the extra information about battles or items they find. And it looks like, just like in the previous games, you'll find higher level enemies roaming around in lower level areas. So you'll need to be aware of the things that are happening around you when you're out exploring. And we got to see a tiny bit of greatsword gameplay. At the moment, there's not too much to say about it since the characters were really low level and it didn't seem like they had access to a lot of their abilities. But from what we can see, greatsword does seem to have wide attacks that may be able to hit multiple enemies, and even though those attacks were not as quick as some of the other weapon types, its attack speed was still a bit faster than I expected it to be. I've got a feeling that this will be a powerful weapon that will be good for staggering enemies, since the Cyclone sword skill in this gameplay manages to knock back an enemy and send it flying. So I do want to see what greatswords will be able to do once they have more abilities available to them. But that's all from me today. There's not long until the release now, but they still haven't shown some important things like how character progression works. So I hope that's something we'll be able to see soon, since it'll give me much more of an idea of how much depth this game will have. And an extended look at multiplayer would be nice, since I want to see how this game is going to be handled compared to the previous ones. But when they start talking about these things, I'll be sure to let you know all about it. So, if you enjoyed this video, then please leave it a like, and if you want to see more videos from me, then don't forget to subscribe and click that bell. If you want to stay up to date with everything I'm doing, then follow me over on social media. The links to everywhere you can find me will be in the description. I'll be making some new videos very soon, but until I make those videos, I'll see you all later.